Breakeven Brothers
Awesome. We are recording episode 38, 3A. We're almost up to 40, which is pretty crazy. What's going on, Brad? Yeah, what's going on?
Not much. Tried doing my taxes AI recently. That was fun. Almost got
As
there.
a CPA, I'm offended by that. I have to take my pitchfork up with that statement.
That's why I brought it up. I think I tried it last year too, but that did not work out. I thought, the model's got a little bit better. Let's try it. And I put everything in TurboTax. That was a bit of a sad day, given that I owe a bit of money. I thought, why is this the case? Let me see what AI has to offer, and gave it some information. It came up with a few details and talked about various tax laws that might affect me, but honestly, I didn't think it would be that bad. Like it seemed like it could be a bit better. Long story short is, I think there's room to grow there. It's gotten really good at coding, which we've all seen on Twitter. If you're on X, you just see all the software is dead themes. But yeah, I think for taxes, there's still a lot of domain knowledge there. And math, well, maybe it's really good at scientific math. I don't know. Taxes feel a little bit different. So yeah. That was a fun little weekend endeavor of sometimes you gotta test the waters and see where things land. And that one to me felt like we're not there yet.
Yeah, I think it's more a reflection of the U.S. tax code than it is like programming. Because when you're writing code, the AI models are so good at writing code. Everything gets distilled into bits, into ones and zeros. It's very at the end of the day, it's deterministic. Where like the tax code, like it's deterministic, obviously, because you are going to owe a certain thing, but like it's written very ambiguously. Like you can kind of reason. You have to go back. Like if you have like any kind of complex tax situation, you might need to reference prior case law to see what the precedent is. Like if you have a really special scenario, and so it's much more like unstructured, and it's much more of like a blob versus like programming and computers are very ordered into everything. Like everything essentially gets, again, like a ones and a zero at the end of the day, right? But for taxes, it's a whole different beast. I would love to say that. Yeah,
I was gonna say, I'm surprised that TurboTax just asked me so many questions. That's how the tax law is complicated. I can't imagine the branches that exist in that software that say, if you say yes to this, you go down this way. If you say no to this later, you come back around. So that part always gets me, where I wish I had an AI agent that was able to answer these questions immediately, so I could pop up TurboTax and it's already kind of knows a little bit about my life and can do all that. So it would be pretty cool.
Yeah, one thing on the taxes, and then we can move on. But I remember in college, I had a great tax professor, and there was some weird tax rule. I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was like, oh, you can depreciate things from all the way up from the year 1987, and then if you put anything in the service after 1988, then you can keep depreciating. So it was like a 1-year gap, right? It didn't make any sense. And basically, he was like, anyone know why there's a 1-year gap? Like, I don't think about why. And basically, everyone's like trying to be like, no, like, why would it be 1-year gap? Like, what was happening in 1988 or whatever? And he's like, just because some politician like lobbied, and they probably had some vested interest, and so that's just how it got put into law, and that's the only reason. Yeah, so there's not always a rhyme or reason, and it's not always logical, and that's just the way it is. So good old taxes, death and taxes, always guaranteed. Yep.
Love it. Well, cool. There's been a crazy past few weeks, like all things AI, and we're going to do a little bit of a release recap, as I like to put it. So when these releases come out, it always feels like everyone's firing at the same time. So part of the release is OpenAI, Codex 5.3 Spark. So this is the first model that's powered on Cerebrus. Not sure that's exactly how you say it, but fast inference. We have the 5.3 model came out, I think, the week prior, and the Spark model is kind of the faster experience using the Codex tool. So it depends on your task. It's not the smartest model, but it's really fast, really different experience. If you've used Claude Code or Codex, you know that sometimes speed can be a bottleneck, especially if you want to do a large refactor. So if you feel like you're doing something that doesn't need full intelligence and you just want to get stuff done, try out 5.3 Spark. So that should be available in Codex. From Anthropic, Claude Sonnet 4.6. I believe that one came out with a 1 million context window in the API. So this was a big release from Anthropic. Came out this week. Claude Code, again, has a pretty large following, given that they ship awesome models and good harnesses. Excited to see them keep shipping for 4.6. They even came out with a fast mode. So if you toggle /fast, I believe, in Claude Code, that gets you 2.5x faster inference. So kind of like Spark with Codex. But I think it's 6 times the price. So it depends on your use case. Might or might not make sense, but it's cool that they're offering it. It feels like there's a differentiation in the market between high intelligence and slow and good enough but fast. And then the last one that we'll talk about is Google. They came out with both Gemini 3.1 Pro in preview and Lyria 3. So Ben had reminded me about Lyria, but Lyria is basically their audio model to chat to get audio file created. And we were doing this right before we recorded the podcast. We wanted to replicate or create maybe a new Breakeven Brothers intro. So a lot of listeners have reached out and applauded about that intro. So thank you for all that feedback. Ben created it with other AI tools and we love it. And so we thought with Lyria 3, let's give it a try, see what Google has to offer. It fell a little bit short, I'll be honest. So Ben, what do you think?
Yeah, no, it's we basically have the same prompt that we came up with the other service, which you hear in the intro, of course, and it just was not it. Like it, it's about musical taste, right? So like someone might love that song, but like to me, what it was producing, I said like, hey, 90s R&B, like West Coast, like melodic radio jingle or something like that, and that's what you hear in the intro to our podcast. And Lyria 3 like took that prompt and made something that, in my opinion, doesn't sound anything like it. Like it just doesn't sound anything like it. So I don't know. Maybe what we'll do, Brad, is we should like just download the MP4 and like just put like up on our video, like on our YouTube channel, and just be like, hey, here's that song if you want to hear it, and like have people listen to it, because like they sound completely unrelated. Like that's my overall point. Like you'd expect them to kind of sound similar based on like the description, but they sound completely unrelated. And the Suno one, which is what we use for the OG, is much more like, I think, in sync with what the prompt was, whereas Lyria is like, sounds like a Disney song, in my opinion.
Yeah, and I was trying to ask it to do the Breakeven Brothers podcast, and it came out multiple tries saying the Breakeven Brothers podcast, which, yeah, I had to ask it a few times there, which to me, I thought that was a little bit odd. I feel like break even is a normal word that Google should have in its training data set, but I'm not sure. Maybe that's a tough one, but yeah, overall, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, the one thing I would say is that what I did notice though is that it's better with the lyrics, I think. Like and maybe this is like Suno and some of the songs I've used, because we haven't just used Suno for this song. I've used it for other things, and sometimes you can't understand like the lyric as well. Like it kind of like mumbles through it, or kind of like just you can't. It's hard to understand, and like I feel like Lyria is very like enunciated. And it's almost, and like in songs, people don't always enunciate, right? Like if you listen to a Nirvana song, sometimes it's hard to know what he's saying. So like I feel like that's what makes it. It doesn't have as much like flavor. I don't know. That's just my 30-second use case before
it's like that too for code. I feel like there's code that works, and there's code that works and feels and looks good, and maybe that's the part that they might be missing, where the music is technically music at a high level, but it doesn't have the pizzazz, the taste, the little oomph that makes it special.
Yeah.
Where our current intro, yeah, we could play it, we could listen to it. The fans love it, so we're keeping that one. And Lyria 3, I think, is an excellent addition, probably useful for a lot of things, but for radio jingles, for intro podcasts, little bits and pieces there, maybe not yet. I'm sure the pricing
not yet.
I think Google consistently does pretty well on pricing. So
yeah, it's cool to see them do it. I think it's always good to have more competition and everything. So
yeah.
So one of the other things, Brad, that I wanted to kind of chat about in this episode was actually related to OpenCode. And are you familiar with OpenCode? I'm sure you are, but
well, it's funny you say that, because I've installed it and I ran it one time. I think it's the terminal UI.
Yeah,
it's a bit of an experience, which is both good and bad. But I honestly haven't touched it ever since then, so I'm pretty unfamiliar with it, I would say.
Okay, cool. So I'm on the push to kind of like specify, if that's the right word, for like Claude Code. Like I like Codex, I got Claude Code, like these CLI tools, but OpenCode to me feels like I can be a bit more agnostic, and I can pick the model and still have the like agentic loop, agentic harness that like Claude Code is so great with, and Codex is so great with, but I can have a bit more variety in terms of like the specific AI I use. So I've been tinkering with that. And one of the things that I found was really cool was that you can download a local LLM model onto your your physical hardware, and through the config file of OpenCode, you can hook up to that model as long as Ollama is running. And so I was also tinkering with that, and I downloaded Qwen 3 8B, I want to say, and then Llama 2, which was like really, I was just trying to get it set up because I was having some issues. And Llama 2 was like really easy. Yeah, really old.
Old and AI use too.
Yeah, it was really quick to download and quick to try. And then finally, I downloaded the GPT OSS 20B, which is the biggest model I've downloaded and I was playing with. And I would say it's actually really impressive. And one of the things that OpenCode does that I didn't know, I suppose I could have read the documentation, but these days I just wing it. I don't know. I feel like I just wing it and then I ask AI what's going on. Probably not the recommended path, but first thing I noticed was that it picked up all my Claude skills, which I was like really surprised by. So it just sat there and it just read all the Claude skills. And so whenever I wanted to use my like Nano Banana Image Pro skill that I had made in Claude Code, I could ask it in OpenCode and it would just go read those Claude files, which I thought was really interesting.
That's awesome, sure it'd be the same. I think there's been a big push to actually normalize those to be like just skills. I think there was specific name folders for like .claude or .codex, and there's agents.md, like claude.md, etc. And I think there's been a unification specifically for these big, AI labs saying, hey, we have these various toolings, we need to make it unified, and getting everybody on board, because OpenCode, Codex, Claude Code, it's a small world out there. I think people are used to be very competition first, and now it's like, hey, we're all competing, we're all in the same vein. Hopefully, ideally, it's a bit better. So I think OpenCode, reading Claude Code is great. I think what would be even better, which I think we're getting to, is having them all standardized on one specific location and ideally one specific spec, kind of like MCP. So exciting to see that they're doing more effort. It sounds like they're making the developer experience better.
Yeah, and so that was really easy to get it set up, and I still moved my Claude skills into like an OpenCode directory. I don't know if that's just like the OCD in me, but I was just like, I don't want it to like go through Claude. Like if I ever want to completely delete Claude for whatever reason, not that I would right now, but like I don't want it to be like there. I want it to be like standalone. And then what I was going to do was basically just commit my skills, all the different skills I have that are sitting in OpenCode now, just commit those into my GitHub account. And then if I need to work from my laptop, I can just like pull those skills and keep them fresh that way. That way, because right now I have like my home machine and I have another laptop, but I don't really use it much for like the AI stuff. But I want to start using it more. And my excuse has always been, well, I don't have it downloaded and I don't want to have to set it all up here. But I'm like, well, now I can just, commit those. And
I have to ask a question about the laptop. Are you getting the Token Frenzy, sir?
Token Frenzy? I don't know.
It's the kind of proliferation of using AI tools because they're so good now that people just want to use them all the time. So, having another computer to run AI tools, is that the mantra, or just interested?
No, I think for me, it's like it's efficiency. Like, so I wrote a blog on my website, bennettbernard.com, and I was talking about like on-premise AI, which I actually want to talk about here in a little bit. But I was out like doing stuff with the kids. Like there was, I think my daughter was in dance. And so I was like at the dance studio and I was like just working. And I was like, well, I'd like to be able to do what I want to do and like have all the tools I need to do my writing and everything on this laptop, but I otherwise wouldn't if I didn't like set this up that way, So it's more about efficiency. Like I don't use it just to use it, I think I like AI for like the tool aspect. I'm not into AI just for like the pure like passion of like geeking out on like 1 million context window versus a 4 million context window. Like that part to me, it's just more about like using it as a tool. And so that's kind of I'm not getting any new souped up laptop to like run the latest model. Not anytime soon.
In your future.
No Mac Minis. And if I see OpenClaw one more time on the internet, I'm going to smash my computer. No, but yeah, it was cool. So like, OpenCode is really cool. And, I wanted to kind of segue that into like, I want to get your thoughts, Brad. This is just purely, we haven't really talked about this, so I'm going to hit you with it live, basically.
Okay.
And what do you think about on-premise AI models? And the reason I'm going to preface that is because in accounting, and accounting isn't the only industry that has this, but like, finance data is typically very restricted and sensitive and confidential. And a lot of accountants, will tell me, and I've heard that like, I can't use AI because, it's even if I have the plans that don't share and don't train on your data, like it's still, you never know. Like that's kind of what they say, you never know. And one of the things I've kind of said is like, well, you can just download these models and run them locally. Now, like you probably don't have the hardware to like really, run the max models, right? Like the 5.3s and the 4.6 for Opus and everything. But like if you invested enough, you could have the hardware and that just runs completely like airtight. Like you can set it up so it doesn't even have internet access. It just connects to your machine. And I began to think about it more like I operate in the mortgage industry, and mortgage industry is again one of those industries that like is very, very, has a lot of sensitive data, has, borrower information, right? And so it's financial data and it's like really sensitive borrower information. And so if there's ever was a use case or, an example for like needing on-premise AI, I was like a mortgage company wanting to use AI to like read customer documents, but they don't want to expose it to the, via the API to these external providers. That could be a solution. What do you think about that take? I need to know.
I like it, but I think an open source model with the class of intelligence we're seeing from leading AI labs feels far off. I think for me as a developer personally, I get very accustomed to using the latest model. And I think if you take a look back at a year of model advancements, they're significant. But as you use like whatever the new model is, 5.3, you get used to it. And once, the next model comes out, whether that's from OpenAI, Gemini, Claude, it just feels like that's the new baseline. I think with the open source models, we get good releases. They just aren't prioritized as much. And to me, because I'm just trying to use the latest and best, and oftentimes in these tools, whether Codex, Claude, Gemini CLI even, they're all using the latest models. So these models feel like they're coming out often. It feels like the intelligence is getting better. I personally really like the private model, own your own stack, own your own inference, but I do know that comes with a cost of compute, and running a good like open source model takes compute. I think NVIDIA has like a Spark computer or some specific AI local computer that has really good specs for running, kind of like a GPU on your desktop for AI processing. I think that is really exciting, where if you have this airtight workflow, you want to run a good model. A good model requires decent compute. Now NVIDIA can package this up for you and ship it to consumers that gives you maybe not a $30,000 GPU that would run like a crazy good model that's private, but something that's in between where it's much better than, a small model that could run on your local hardware. But this is a tier better than that, where you have dedicated specific hardware that's basically a souped up GPU that's running the inference. So I think long story short, I'm so spoiled by having all this good intelligence that I feel like as a developer, every time a model release comes out, I'm like, this is awesome. And then the next one comes out and I forget about the last one. It just keeps going. And I think in the open source world, we get releases at a much slower pace. The intelligence doesn't scale as fast, and companies don't prioritize it because I think, the money is a little bit harder in that area. So to me, if you can have a use case that is not needing the latest intelligence and it can run on these models in a high confidence way, then I think it totally makes sense. I think at the current moment, though, it feels like there's a gap where the workflows that I think people are working on today are very much powered by the latest and greatest. So to me, it might be kind of hard to have something feel reliable with local compute, given the open source we see today.
Yeah. Well, I think for sure, like if you were an enterprise and you felt like you needed to go down that path, you would need to spend some serious coin. Like you wouldn't just go pick up a Alienware desktop. Like you would need to get like a server rack and all that stuff for sure. And I think one of the things though that's interesting too, and I liked how you approached it, because in your line of work, especially, like having that next wave of intelligence is really important, and like that can be another unlock. Like I think Sonnet was before Opus, right? Or there was, I can't remember which one, but one of the Opus 4.5 came out and it really was like an unlock for like a lot of things. And that like enabled people to be more efficient. It pushed all the other models forward too. And for me, since I'm in accounting and kind of finance, it's very operational focused. And I actually don't want things to change that much. I kind of want things to be, let's have this work and like, let's not fuss with it until it breaks. Basically, that's typically how like the back office of a business is run. And I put in the article that I wrote on my website, one of the benefits too of being, this on-prem running local models on your own hardware is like you can kind of control when you want to upgrade the model. Whereas like, if you're using just a different provider, they're constantly tweaking things and making sure that it's super intelligent. And while that's all good, you just don't have that control. So it's just, if you like the latest intelligence and, you're fine with your workflow and you need that for your workflow, totally fine. But if you want the control and you like have like specific reasons to keep it airtight and, whether it's client data or financial data concerns, like on-prem, I think my overall focus was like on-prem isn't really talked about very much, especially in like the non-technical world. People tend to think of just ChatGPT as AI, and it's like, no, there's way more out there. And if you feel like for whatever reason, or you might even have a client, if you're working in public accounting, you might have a client that says, I don't want AI having any of my information. You may still be able to, explain, hey, I understand your concerns, but like this is just running locally. If a nuclear bomb goes off and destroys the grid, this thing can still run. Maybe that's too extreme because I guess we wouldn't have electricity, but you know what I mean? Like it would be fine. And so just broadening the awareness that there's different ways to run these models. And again, with OpenCode, I had a lot of fun just tinkering with that. And I do have a video on my other channel where I'm going to kind of show how you can make a local AI like document parser. Because if you wanted to read someone's like 1040, you can give it to the local AI model. It can read the 1040. Don't worry about social security numbers, because it's not getting sent anywhere. It's not getting sent via API, right? It's just running on your machine. So there's, I think, a lot of use cases for that in accounting. So
yeah, that's cool. I think when I played with Ollama, it was very interesting to see that the longer the conversation goes, I believe the more RAM it took. When you're using these APIs that provide you inference over, an HTTP call, you don't feel any of these tuning parameters. You don't feel the RAM impact. And so I think you have to choose the exact model that you want, like Llama 7B or Llama 30B, and different sizes impact your machine. And so I think the local LM gives you a lot more control, but with that comes the expertise needed. I feel like people don't get that or don't want to spend time on it. It's kind of, I just want AI and I don't want to think about it. So I think they forego that option and will go the easier route, which feels like I can boot up Codex or Claude, ask it to make me an integration with my current existing software or whatever, and it'll be done. Where it's like, for Ollama, I'd have to go download it, I have to go run it. Can my computer run it? Which model should I choose? So I think if that was a little bit easier or maybe a better education, I think that could be a big win, because there are a lot of use cases. Like this might sound crazy, but if you imagine 10 years out, the open source models that we look at today are going to be really capable. And I feel like at that point, these models are getting so good that it feels like an open source model can handle some pretty complex tasks. Where if you give Llama 2 a very complex task today, I guarantee you it will not have the same performance what we see from the leading models today that are private. Yeah. So like, I think in the long term, it'll only get more important probably. But I don't think enough people really play with it, to be quite honest.
Yeah. Well, and one thing I noticed, and it was funny because I left it in the video that I made on using OpenCode in Ollama, but basically I didn't realize, so the context window I had on the model, I think was like 4,000. So like very small, right? Because I'm just running it locally and I'm just kind of messing around with things. And I noticed that like I would tell OpenCode to like do something, and you would see it thinking about what it was going to do, and then it would just like stop, and it wouldn't respond to what I was going to wouldn't respond to my original request. And I'm like, what the hell? What gives? And I would go to Ollama CLI and I would ask the same thing and it would do it. I was like, that's really strange. And long story short, what I realized was that when you have, and I'm sure Claude is the same way, but OpenCode, when you make a simple like chat request, it sends way more context than just the CLI. And that was like what was causing the difference. Behind the scenes, it sends way more context than if you just are sending it through the chat. And so when I was doing the video, it was like a real life, like, wow, I didn't know that, because I hadn't really tinkered in the sandbox, that like when you're using Cloud Code, Codex, OpenCode, it's not just sending your message it's sending a whole bunch of other information that again makes up, how amazing those systems are, how amazing Codex and Cloud Code are. But there's just so much behind the scenes that like I didn't appreciate until I was like tinkering with the local model and the having to work within the constraints of the small context window. So it's pretty cool.
That's awesome. You learned about that because I feel like there is a lot about the harness, about the prompt. It's a lot of details and juice in there. So both of those tools are awesome. One thing that I've really liked recently is in the Codex app, there's actually an automation section. So this is something that you can tell Codex in the UI. So this is the Codex app, not the CLI. The Codex app allows you to add an automation that says, every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, all work days, do something at some interval. So it could be weekly, daily, etc. One thing that I've found is it's really nice to kind of have a weekly dependency check. So for projects that I work on, like split my expenses, oftentimes I want to upgrade my dependencies, but I don't want to do it manually. It'd be nice if every week or every month even, I could schedule an automation to say, look at the dependencies in my app. This could be PHP dependencies. It could be JavaScript. See what the changes are from my version to the latest version. Create kind of a plan to upgrade. So this is just various things you can schedule within Codex to say, I don't have to kick it off. You can deliver me a plan. And one other one that I've really liked is if you use Codex a lot, which I think people who use these coding agent tools really love, is you can ask Codex to do analysis on itself. So if you've had 20 chats in the past week with Codex, you can say, look at my past 7 days, look at all the chat sessions I've had with you. Please suggest various rules to add to my agents.md file based on the chat history. So I can parse all this JSON, see what you're explaining multiple times, and suggest real life edits either to your overall agents.md or your per project agents.md. So to me, it feels like these automations can unlock a lot of power. And with all things AI, it feels like there takes some time for folks to figure out the power. I have barely dipped into it and I really want to do more, but it takes a lot of effort and thought to think what is actually useful and what's not, and how do you get through kind of the cruft that you see online and find something actually useful. So if you are using Codex or even Claude Code, a really cool trick is to just ask it to do kind of meta-analysis on itself. Be like, hey, here's my chats in the past 7 days. Like, go look at them. It can figure out where they're stored, parse all that info, and give you actually valuable insights. And you don't have to adopt them if you don't agree with them. But it's, no human's going to go take a look at their past 40 chats and analyze line by line. Like some of those things, it feels like AI is just, bred for that. And that takes 5 seconds to kick off a query. It does all this processing in the background. So I don't know if you tried automations, but really cool. And if anyone listening is using the Codex app, please leave a comment below. I'd love to hear some cool automations here. I think it's a severely underinvested in part of the app. Maybe not underinvested, but underknown, like basically unknown area of the app that I think people, if they spent more time, could get a lot of value out of it. So if you have any cool ones, please share with us.
Yeah, I'm guilty of not using. I haven't tried Cowork or the Codex app yet, and
you're due.
I feel like
you're due.
I know. I feel like I'm just kind of like enjoying the CLIs now, which I know I've been out for a while, but and like what you were saying of like having a daily process where he comes in and like does something in the Codex app. Like right now, I have a daily process that I just go to OpenCode now, and I run it manually.
Yeah,
I like running it, Brad. I like running it. I don't want to be automated, But no, it's cool. That is a cool feature. And AI is so interesting because there's certain things where like I just cannot imagine putting AI involved. Like I don't like AI for like cold sales outreach. Like no one wants to talk to a bot and get sold by a bot, in my opinion. But the dependency managing thing, like that is one of those things where probably looking back, you'll be like, how did we ever manage dependencies? Like how to do it manually? Like what are you talking about? Like it's like we had to drive a stick shift. What do you mean? It's just not just a manual gears. Like it's gonna be like the same kind of thing. And yeah, that's such a I'm sure for the engineers out there, it's like that's such a relief to not have to worry about little stuff like that. That can nuke your program if an app isn't, if a dependency is not updated correctly or whatever. But like it just gets handled in the background, and you can focus on the big things.
Yeah, it feels like we're early days in all the automations, and you can even have automations that reference each other. I think there's even a history too. So each run, it can add to like a shared notes file about that run and what it did, and it can learn over time. So it's all basic things. Like when we talked about skills is a markdown file that's just packaged. MCP was, a little bit more complicated orchestration where you have a client and a server, but skill is just a plain markdown file. it feels like automations are very simple too. Just like a scheduled cron job that runs like a markdown file and that can reference the skill and do all this and that. So to me, it's AI is really good at the fundamentals and the logic and writing code. And then we build these systems around it to make that life easier and to unlock a lot more. And they might not feel very meaningful today, but I think with the right insights and tinkering, automations can be a huge, huge win. So yeah, shout out to the Codex team. I think they're doing a fantastic job. And it's like one small tab in the Codex app and probably not very touched. But to me, I would like to spend intentional time over the next few weeks. How can I make my life easier? Again, so I don't have to do these things that I actually don't enjoy doing, but are kind of needed at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think those desktop apps like Codex and Cowork, I don't think they've really been absorbed into the mainstream like knowledge work yet. And I think once they are, that'll be the de facto choice, because again, vibe coding, you kind of need to know what you're doing if you're going to make anything really meaningful and solid, put into production. And the CLI tools are amazing, but I still think you need to most people don't work with a command line. That's just completely foreign to them.
Yeah.
Cowork and Codex and the desktop app, that I think is that nice middle ground of it's on your computer, which means it can access the files and do all the stuff that makes those CLI tools so great. But you don't need to know, Linux commands and stuff like that to get around, right?
Yeah, I think that is the whole selling point, but I agree. Things definitely move fast. So what we use today or what, the bleeding edge is definitely changes, and what the mainstream uses lags pretty significantly. So it's cool using the latest and greatest, but yeah, you got to be mindful that this stuff will really probably pick up in 6 months once everyone else gets around to it.
Yeah, no, for sure. For sure.
Cool. Well, there's one last tweet I want to talk about on the pod. Karpathy was kind of mentioning the end of the app stores. And for someone who works on Apple platforms on the iOS side, I have definitely seen an increase in review times. And the whole hypothesis to this debate is that more apps are being created. How is that happening? Well, we have these awesome AI coding agents. So AI coding agents are creating new apps. New apps are being submitted to the App Store. At some point, though, it feels like if you are an engineer, you can make your own tool, which all engineers love. Do I spend 5 minutes doing something, or do I spend 20 hours automating it? As an engineer, you choose the second path. So his tweet kind of highlighted, is the App Store the right way to do things? Is software going to change in a way because it's easier to write software where that might not make sense to have an App Store? Maybe the software is built, used, and torn back down, which at the cost of Codex and Claude code doesn't feel that crazy to me. I think the pricing structure and the intelligence feels like it's there, but not everyone wants to build an app. Not everyone wants to clone Salesforce, Slack, etc. So to me, I see both sides. I think it's an inflection point, but also not really, because this is bleeding edge and it's not mainstream. But some of these software companies are seeing a bit of a hit in their stock price. Some could say it could be because of this hype. So all in all, I think there's a lot more apps coming out in the App Store, and there's this weird balance of, is this going to make more software? Is this going to make less software? Are App Stores the right avenue? Given 5 years ago, it was hard to make an app, took a lot of freaking effort. Now you can code an app in 2 days and get it up on the App Store. It's different. Apple has never experienced such an influx in apps. I'm very curious how, honestly, it'll all pan out. So what are your thoughts?
Yeah, well, you led this segment with bleeding edge, and I think that's a good way to describe the stock charts these days. And lots of red. It's interesting because one tangible example is, I think as of today on February 23rd, Anthropic, they released that Opus can write COBOL, COBOL.
I saw that,
right?
Yeah.
And on that news, the stock of IBM just shrank. And I'm not an IBM analyst. This is not financial advice, but I think what the understanding from that was that COBOL, which is used in all the financial transactions, underpin our banking system, supposedly, that it's a really legacy language that people don't really learn these days, but it runs everything. And so there's a select kind of few that are responsible for managing it and knowing it, and
Crazy.
that has a premium. Yeah. But with AI and with Opus knowing how to code COBOL, COBOL, right? It's CO.
I think it's Cobalt, but now you're making me question.
Whatever.
I think it has a T at the end.
I don't think it does.
Oh, okay. Maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah.
I don't know it.
No, whatever. Either way, COBOL. Maybe there's a T. Who knows? But long story short, the moat to like competing or like making a new software company has gotten a lot lower, and so I think and it got a lot lower really fast, like very fast. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I think is really interesting. I think what we're seeing with a lot of SaaS, it's like, is that software, to your point earlier, like not a lot of people want to clone Salesforce, right? So there's gonna be certain apps and certain software that like has staying power. But if it's just like a calorie counter app, like I would rather just take a picture of take a picture of what I made and ask AI. Like that's an app that I can't see really sticking around these days. So stuff like that, it just how technical is the problem that you're solving? If it's not that technical and AI can do it with relative ease, then why have an app for that anymore?
Yeah, and I did look it up, so it's COBOL. So Ben is right, but I love the name, Common Business Oriented Language. What a name! The people who learned that probably geniuses. So, but I agree. I think when you look at a software business, there's a lot more to it than software. There's uptime, there's upkeep. We've talked about it plenty of times in the podcast, but I think it bubbled up more recently. And I think one thing is all the business headaches. For example, if you look at a business like Uber, all the legality of doing ride sharing. If you look at a business like Airbnb, breaking down barriers and figuring out the laws and all these regions, like, those aren't clonable businesses. And maybe you look at Slack and you think, oh, it's just chat, it's not that hard. But I'm sure there are things in there, both uptime, reliability, and legal, that make it challenging. So I think as we look at these takes, yes, but no. And if you're on the bleeding edge, you think, oh, I can clone everything. But again, no one wants to spend all that time. I think it becomes increasingly easy to do that as a large company, to say, oh, I don't want to pay my $10 million Salesforce bill, as an example. I don't know clue if it's more or less, but if that's the case, you have these tools that empower you to write code, but then you have to maintain it. So that's the cost on your own, employees and software. So I think one note is build versus buy, and I think build becomes easier, but there's the hidden cost. And two is on the App Store specifically, there has never been a time where there's been more apps. And so now when you go search for Calorie Counter, if you do want to download that, you end up in the sea of vibe coded apps, plus the apps that have been there for 10 to 15 years. And ideally, Apple maybe ranks the old ones higher, but then you come to the conclusion that maybe there's a really good app that was written with Claude or Codex that should be the top contender because it's spent a lot more effort and AI is really good at programming. So it's a weird divide where the quite literal review times for Apple apps, apps in review, it's like published on some website. I forgot the exact name, but that has like tripled in the past few months and has clearly taken a toll on the Apple App Store reviewers. So I bet Apple will do something, if not hire more people, figure out maybe a better way to do things, because they've historically been rather strict, and given the amount of code and apps that are in the ecosystem, maybe there's time for a change up, better rules, better regulations, automations, who knows. But I think overall apps are here to stay. I think the discoverability of the App Store is here to stay. In a few years, 5 years, who knows? I don't know. But I think a lot of these pieces that we see on Twitter are more thought-provoking than they are the actual truth. It's what is the direction that this is talking about, and how would it affect it? How would it affect people if this was the reality today? I think that's the interesting thought of, in 5 years when it's really easy to write any of these apps, do people publish on the App Store anymore because they just write it and tear it down? So pretty interesting.
Yeah, for sure. Strange world out there. It just keeps getting weirder. So Cool. Awesome. All right. Well, should we wrap it up with our bookmarks, Brad?
Yeah. So my bookmark is Replic's new animations. So I'd say in the past 2 to 3 months, ever since I think December, there's been a lot more effort to create animations with AI. There was like a Remotion skill to use React code to create animations. And now this latest one is called Replit animation. And I believe this is a product kind of thing at Replit. I'm honestly not exactly sure, but you basically prompt an animation into existence and it creates up to like 30 seconds using Gemini 3.1 Pro, which is that new Google model. So I guess it takes 3 minutes to generate, and maybe there's some free tier. I haven't done it myself, but looking at the videos that it has generated on X has been pretty impressive. And I think for someone who creates products and wants to have flashy marketing videos, I have never stepped in the ring to try any of these tools, but they all are popping up, and it's on my wheelhouse to get started. But really exciting to see a good animation tool, because it feels nice when you look at these videos and you think, oh, how much effort would that have taken? Like, how do you even animate that? I don't know. And so all these tools are popping up with AI and skills that make this a lot easier. So shout out to Replit. I think they'll probably do pretty well here, given that animations are a huge part of marketing and people do not want to spend time on that. Like, if I've learned anything about building your own business, it's really fun to code as an engineer. Marketing stuff sucks and you spend no effort. If I can spend 10 minutes to make a video, sign me up. So I'll share the link, but yeah, called Replit Animation.
That's cool. Yeah, I don't know if you can see it in the background, but there's a book called The Accountant Marketer up in my bookshelf back there, because I'm with you. Marketing it's not my strong suit.
Stuff.
Yeah, it's hard. So I respect people that can do it really well, because it's hard. Okay, cool, awesome. So my bookmark is from cnet.com, and it's hackers are trying to copy Gemini via thousands of AI prompts, Google reports. So the long story short is that Google issued some report, I guess, in a threat tracker report is what they publish it as. And basically they're stating that hundreds of thousands of AI prompts were used on Gemini in what's called a distillation attack. Again, this is relatively new for me, so I want to understand more what that means. But essentially they're saying that foreign adversaries, saying countries like North Korea, Russia, China, are attempting to steal intellectual property of the model and, use it for their own models that they're building. So basically, like, copy the notes of the model of Gemini and when they build their own models. So to me, it was really interesting. I think, cybersecurity is probably needs to catch up to how fast AI is developing. The pace of AI we talk about a lot on this show. The intelligence is getting better and better. The models are getting into more and more people's hands, which is a good thing. AI is becoming more and more ubiquitous. But there's still a lot of security like people just need to be aware of. Like, you wouldn't give your password out to some random website, but sometimes we, or maybe are flippant with a model that we maybe shouldn't be, right? And so it's just, I think again, as a non-technical person, it's always important to keep the cybersecurity element in mind. And seeing companies like Google and others like getting like pelted with like these kinds of attacks, it's sobering that like, look, this is a really, really competitive space, and there's a lot of stuff going on beyond just vibe coding, right? Like, there's a lot of competition. So pretty crazy.
Yeah. Wow. Jam-packed. I mean, we have a few things like shout out to Peter for OpenClaw joining OpenAI. I think, again, it's been on everybody's feed, but that has been talked about security a lot. And I think he's done a lot of security improvements recently that he's talked about in X, but I agree 100%. Sometimes it feels like we're quick to go to AI, and sometimes we forget that, security is important. Give the right data, manage the right data, don't install tools that you don't know what's going on. So I think that's a perfect example and a good reminder, honestly. There needs to be some sort of, monthly reminder that all this stuff is really cool, but just be a little careful,
Yeah. Yep. Agreed. One thing that I will throw in at the end here, and we'll tease it for the next episode, but I think one of your bingo cards is going to come true. One of your bingo spots. Yeah.
I don't have the card up, but I do make good guesses. So I'm not, makes sense to me.
Yeah. Yeah. We'll leave it there. People can tune in the next episode. I think we should revisit it at the top of the list. Cause I saw something and I'm like, I think that's golden. I think that's going to be on there. So cool.
Episode 39 then.
Episode 39. We'll give Brad credit for a bingo card. We will see. Tune in to find out.
Awesome.
Cool. All right. Good stuff. We'll leave it there. See you, Brad.
Sounds good. See ya.
Thank you for listening to the Breakeven Brothers podcast. If you enjoyed the episode, please leave us a 5-star review on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever else you may be listening from. Also, be sure to subscribe to our show and YouTube channel so you never miss an episode. Thanks, and take care. All views and opinions by Bradley and Bennett are solely their own and unaffiliated with any external parties.